As we read Genesis 22, we see that Abraham is being tested by God. Abraham was waiting to have a son. God promised him a son through Sarah. And even Sarah at that time thought it would be impossible for her to have a son. Then God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son. Now, upon doing this, it doesn't say much about what Sarah says or if he actually even tells Sarah what he was about to do. That God spoke to him and said that he wanted him to sacrifice Isaac. Chances are, since it's not written or there's no stories on what Sarah said or if she even knew, is probably because he didn't tell her. He probably didn't tell Sarah that God is asking me to sacrifice Isaac. So we have to look at the context of this. God gives Abraham a promise for a son, fulfills that promise, then it seems like he's going to take that promise away from him. It seems like he's going to take away what he was giving him. And God promised him that Isaac would have many descendants, and now he's asking Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. And Abraham, without even questions, doesn't even question God. If I do this, what will happen? If I do this, you made a promise, or you said you were going to do this. Lord, how are you asking me to do something like this when you just told me these things were going to happen through Isaac? Abraham says nothing like that. So Abraham is committed to being obedient to the Lord, no matter how crazy it sounds or how difficult the test that God is putting him through. That Abraham is going to fulfill this test because he loves the Lord, he trusts the Lord, and he's going to fulfill that test. We kind of want to think what Abraham is thinking at this moment. Like, why wouldn't he question God? Why wouldn't he just say, Lord, you promised me this. Why are you having me sacrifice this when you told me what you were going to fulfill in my life? Instead, chances are, as we look in Hebrews 11:17, we see that Abraham more than likely was thinking that if he sacrificed his son, that God would resurrect him. Just because of the promises that he made prior, that these descendants were going to come from Isaac. So Abraham, knowing what God promised him before he was asked to be sacrificed, he more than likely was thinking that God would resurrect him, because God doesn't break his promises. God fulfills everything that he says he's going to do. So as we see, Abraham prepares Isaac as a sacrifice, and the Lord stops him. And he tells him there's a ram in the bushes, and you use the ram as a replacement for Isaac, because he saw and experienced what Abraham was going to do. Now I want you to think about this for a minute. If God is omnipresent, if he knows everything, why would God ask Abraham to do it? Even though he knew Abraham was going to do that, even though he knew Abraham was going to fulfill what God was asking him to do, why would God still have him do it? Why would God have any of us, even today, go through the things that we go through, the tests that we go through, the character development go through, when God already knows what the outcome is going to be? And the thing that you need to think about is, if God is omnipresent and he knows everything, what could God possibly gain from these moments? And when you look at it, God is after the experience in those moments, to be a part of those moments. Even though he knows the outcome, he gets to live these moments out with you in those moments that you're going through them. So God is fulfilled with the experience of Abraham going through those motions and preparing his son for a sacrifice. God gets fulfilled that to see and experience what Abraham was going to do of that nature. When we go through tests and trials and God's putting us through them, even though he knows the outcome, he already sees the end. He already knows our beginning of our life, the middle of our life, and the end of our life. The reason why a lot of us go through these trials and tests is for our character development, to understand God on a deeper level, to build a better relationship with God, to walk with God, to receive the Holy Spirit, but also so God can experience your life with you. He gets to live that life out with you, side by side. Even though he knows what's going to happen, he still gets to experience that with you. And that's what fulfills the Lord. That's what fulfills him, is that he gets to live that with you. And he gets to see, even knowing, he still gets to see and feel those moments together. Because we know God has emotions. We know that God can be angered. God is filled with joy. He has emotions, so he gets to feel those emotions with you while you're experiencing those things. And once he sees in the trials that you go through and the difficult times that you're facing, a lot of times he's wanting to see if you're willing to sacrifice what you love most in your life and put him first. A lot of times he's putting us through these difficult times to see if you're willing to sacrifice what you love most to put him first. Now, we know God's not going to ask us to sacrifice a child or anything of that nature, but maybe it could be money. Maybe you have a love for money. He's wanting to see, are you willing to sacrifice money to put him first? Maybe you have a love for other things, other habits, maybe good habits, maybe bad habits. Maybe you're facing a lot of sin in your life that you have a natural love for because you can't walk away from that sin. Maybe he's willing to see, are you willing to sacrifice what you love most so he can fulfill and give you what he's promised for your life? See, and then we get asked, or we think about sometimes, if God's all knowing, how does free will and these things come into play? How do we have free will or make decisions if God already knows our decisions? If God's going to know what I'm going to say before I even say it? If God knows what I'm going to pray before I even pray it? And like I said, it's part of that experience. He gets to experience these things with you while you're going through prayer. Like, he gets to experience the prayers, even though he knows what you're going to say, he still gets to experience it with you, because God has emotions. He is filled with these types of experiences. He gets enjoyment. He gets to feel the love out of these experiences with you. If you're facing a difficult time right now, if you're going through hardships and you're really on your face seeking the Lord out, and you're giving him everything you have, and he's starting to be silent, or you start to feel like a separation between you and the Lord, look over a few things. Look over one thing. Look over fasting. See if you can get into fasting. Fasting is a great spiritual way to answer some prayers and build a relationship in a deep level. I can't tell you enough, like, through fasting, what that can do in your life. If you've never done fasting, don't take baby steps into fasting. Take small, maybe half a day or something, try it out, but get into the habit of fasting. You will see a spiritual connection through that. And at times, prayers can be answered through that. When I was a child, I was told that you had to love God with all your heart. And it was difficult for me as a kid growing up, because I loved my parents, I loved my dad a lot at that time, and I didn't understand what that meant. So when I heard you had to love God with all your heart, I was like, how can I love God more than my dad? Like, I love my dad, but I didn't really know God. So it took me a long time until my adulthood before I finally understood what it meant to love God with all your heart. And that's above everything in your life, to put him first. And once I reached that level, that's when the doors opened. That's when the spiritual connection came in. And I started seeing God, and his character was being revealed to me. And I started to build a strong relationship with him. And then also, a lot of most difficult times in my life was around that. It's still that time. Still going through some of the difficult times in my life right now as I build a close connection to him, because It's the character development. It's the character that he's after. He's trying to change and mold and prepare for something in the future. He's trying to prepare something big for the future. In order to get there, you have to go through the trials. You have to be tested. You have to change your character and focus on building his kingdom and not your own.